I'm told by some of the newspapers that I'm the economic destroyer of the Philippines for objecting to some of the things the mining companies are doing. Well, first and foremost, I want to tell you I'm not an anti-mining activist. I'm not against mining if it's done in a responsible way. The problem is I have not seen any responsible mining in the Philippines. None whatsoever. Now, this bit is always difficult for me, as Gina knows. I dedicate this to the people who've been killed. I've had 11 people killed in the groups we've been trying to help in the last 5 years. I think that's absolutely disgusting for a democratic country to allow that sort of thing to happen.
That's right.
We were with Father Pops, Father Fausto, on the 23rd of September in Marbella. He was murdered on the 17th of sorry. I get fed up with this. So many people being killed. People who've got 5 children. I'm a father of 5, I'm a grandfather of 8. I imagine what the families must feel with all this. Nobody's paying them any compensation. Sorry, I'll do the next slide. I won't look at it. This upsets me even more because I happen to know his wife, his children, his father, his mother, and the rest of the family. It upsets me every time. It's got to stop. The killing has got to stop. It cannot go on. Everybody who objects to mining is labelled an anti-mining activist, and then they get murdered. By who? Who is organising this? Who is killing it? I'm now told by the NGOs that I'm a target, and so is Dr. Robert Goodland. When we went to Davao, we were met by 2 armed men who took us to the university. At the university, I couldn't even move my room without an armed man following me everywhere. And when I went to sleep at night, there was an armed guard with a Kalashnikov outside my room. I have never had this anywhere in the world. And I work in the Niger Delta. I carry no guns, I have no armed guards, there are many militants, but nobody threatens my life. I'm there to help the communities. Here, I'm being targeted because I'm trying to help people. And that includes governments, because we work with governments, my colleagues and I. We're actually a group of volunteers. You can see it's rather interesting because England is a bit like the Philippines. We actually have 6,000 islands, but we don't have the big islands you have. We have a lot of small ones. Nor do we have the biodiversity that you have. I think one of your problems is if you have all of these marvellous islands, and you've got a lot of them that are very, very vulnerable, you've got very little of your forest left, and what is left is now being threatened. That says less than 6% of original forest. I think the figure is now 3. And you have cumulative problems. If you look at this chart, and I drew this up actually, you've got mountains, you've got high rainfall, you've got loss of forest cover, and then you've got seismic activity, you've got fault lines all over the place, and then you want to put open cast mining in the middle of an area with seismic activities. What are you thinking of? And there's another problem with open cast mining. If you make a mine in an area with a lot of seismic activity, you can cause what is called induced seismic activity. Now, the seismologists cannot tell you what you're likely to do. You might increase the amount of seismic activity by 2 times, you might increase it by 50 times. So why would you take the risk? Why would you want to risk your life? There is a principle called the precautionary principle, and you should apply that. You should not go into those areas where you're going to risk death and destruction, because that's what you do, and people die as a result of taking those risks. One of the biggest problems that we see here in the Philippines is the failure of strategic planning. There doesn't seem to be an overview of the environment, and there doesn't seem to be an overview of the strategy of how you should develop, for example, small island states. You know, what we recommend is what's called a strategic environmental assessment, and Dr. Goodland and I, he was the former senior environmental advisor to the World Bank. We actually teach that to governments. As I've mentioned already, we work with governments to try to help them to get things right. I came out here, I've been here many times because as head of the international program for WWF, can I have my bottle of water back again? I was here as part of the international committee of WWF. And when the Philippines office, which was an office of WWF US, wanted to become a national organization, I voted along with other members that they should be accepted as a national organization. And we have been supporting them for many years until I retired from WWF in 2001. The first mission we did was with Father Frank Nally of the Columban Fathers, and we went to Midslip. And this tells you the story of the Philippines, because I've got my own. Can't see it yet. Anyway, the mountains in the background are the mountains at Midslip. At the foot of the mountains are these marvelous rice fields. These are very high-yielding rice fields because this is volcanic soil. So guess what the miners want to do? They want to knock those mountains down because there's iron ore underneath. And where do they want to put the waste? On the rice paddies. Madness. And you know what? At no point have any of the miners discussed this with the Minister of the Department of Agriculture, because I met Secretary Alcala on my last trip, and he told me this. He said he had not been consulted by the mining companies. What other country in the world would allow miners to destroy agriculture fields without consultation with the minister or the head of the department? And with us on that trip, we took a very famous person. Her name is Claire Short. She was not just a minister in the British government, she was a Secretary of State, which is higher than a minister. She had ministers working for her. And she was responsible for international development. And she had a look at it herself. I've known her for many years because when I was in WWF, I used to handle quite a lot of money from her department to help people in the Philippines and elsewhere. She said the environmental effects are catastrophic, as are the effects on people's livelihoods. And she actually told this to the Assistant Secretary of DNR, who was the current Secretary, Mr. Paki. She also told it to Mr. Romualdez, and she was complaining bitterly as he came into the ambassador's house, and he said that he didn't come to be insulted. And she looked at him and she said, Mr. Romualdez, I didn't come to insult you, nor did I come to see the appalling degradation caused by your mining companies or the appalling environmental and human rights abuses being caused. If you wish to leave, that's your decision. If you wish to stay, that's your decision. He didn't say anything more. So we have basically, I'm involved in oil and gas as well. This is a book that we've just finished for 7 countries in West Africa. Again, working with the governments and with NGOs, because I insist that whatever work, if we work with the government, we insist on having the NGOs in all meetings as well. And so we've just produced this book on extractive industries. This is the second version on Midslip. You can again see the fields and the mountains in the background. And when she looked at this report, Claire Short said, this is Claire Short here, she said the problem is rooted you can see here the second paragraph. The problem is rooted in the failure of the Philippine government to maintain the health of its agricultural sector and to conserve vital natural resources such as tropical forests and water, which contribute to the national output. The loss of watersheds, for example, has a direct impact on the water supply for irrigation that is so vital for rice farmers. Yet the government seems to regard forests purely as a source of timber and as a potential area for mining. Now that's coming to one of the world's leading people, and she is now the chairman of the Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative, and she told me the other day that she's hoping that Philippines is going to join. Well, you've seen this already, that what's actually happening, but I want you to look at this pit, because I'm going to talk about Tampakan later on, and this is what they want to do, only they want to make an even bigger pit. They want to make an 800-meter deep pit. So one of the things that we do is that I've developed a methodology over the years, many years now with UNEP, of looking at if you look at the slide, I can point to myself actually. If you look at this map here, we always start with agriculture and watersheds. This is the way we do it, we measure it. And you can see the agriculture around the edge of Sibuyan Island. And then if you look over here, you can see what the miners want to do. They want to mine it all. Right? You waiting? Right, thank you very much. Oh yes, okay. Well, you can see all the mining licenses around here. Now, what is interesting is some of those mining licenses are even inside the national park. This is Mount Giting, one of the prime national park in the whole of the Philippines. Here it is up here. Look at it. Like, that's the national park. And look at the mining licenses. They're right inside the national park. The Assistant Secretary told Kyle Zingapan of PAFID that she got her coordinates wrong, and her reply was, Mr. Assistant Secretary, I took the coordinates from your database in your office. Then you have to look at ancestral domain. And then you look at the shallow marine environment. I mean, one of the things that needs to be looked at, it's not just a question of letting all the miners do things. What is the cumulative impact of a large number of mines on a shallow ecosystem around a small island like Sibuyan? Well, I am delighted that partly as a result of these maps, but mainly as a result of pressure from you people, they have now decided to ban all mining on Sibuyan Island. Thank God for that. This is Zamboanga del Sur. Unbelievable. These were the original tenements there. Now, we had a meeting yesterday, was it yesterday? Yes, with the MGB. And quite a large number of them have now been removed. But again, look at the mining tenements over the agricultural area. When we met Secretary Alcala of the Agriculture Department, he informed me that nobody from mining had ever gone to him to discuss their mining plans. How is that possible in a country whose economy is based upon agriculture and fisheries and forestry? Sorry. So here you have, this is Mitzlip again, this shows you the fields again. 70% of Filipinos depend on agriculture and fishing for survival. The Mitzlip farmland is currently well irrigated on rich volcanic soils with terraced productive rice fields. The proposal is to destroy them, the sacred mountain, Mount Sugarloaf, Pinukis Mountain, through open cast mining and deposit the mine waste and soil and tailings in the rice fields. They are now taking out a writ of Kalikasan, which was set up by former Chief Justice Puno. If you look at these pictures here, you will notice we blacked out the faces of all the Filipinos. Why? The mayor of Mitzlip is paid. Does anybody know what the mayor of Mitzlip is paid? No. She's paid the same as the mayor of Manila. And she's got a tiny little village. Why do you think that is? Because somebody wants mining in Mitzlip. So guess what? The mayor is pro-mining. The FDIC, I mentioned today in the press meeting that I talked with people who were being forced to give FDIC, and one was a woman, a mother of 3 children, and I asked her if she had agreed to FDIC, and she said no. And then listen to this. The representative of the NCIP, this is the Agency Protecting Indigenous People, came to see her, and he said, have you signed the FDIC? And she said, no. He said, you have 3 children, aged 11, 8 and 3. You better sign. A direct threat to her children. She said, what do I do? I said, you sign. But what an appalling situation in a democratic country. How is that official getting away with working for NCIP and forcing women to sign the FDIC? Then we have the case of TBI. The miners say that all the damage is caused by small-scale miners. Not true. The biggest damage in the country is caused by the big mining companies. No small-scale miners can knock down Mount Kanatui. No small-scale miners can build Marinduki. No small-scale miners can make a hole of 800 meters in the mountains in South Cotabato. And this is what, get it right, this is what happens to you if you don't want to move. And eventually, they still wouldn't move. So the guards of the mining company came and knocked down the houses. I mean, what a situation in a democratic country. How can you allow that? Now, I'm coming to my biggest bugbear. What the biggest risk I think to the Philippines. I undertook to have a look at their documentation. And there's total confusion in the different types of documents the government has. When you apply for an ECC, Environmental Compliance Certificate, you have to provide an EIS, Environmental Impact Statement. And that's a very small document, it's only 580 pages. If you do this to international standards, you have to have an environmental and social impact assessment. Well, that is what Dr. Goodland and I are used to assessing for governments and for NGOs. So we undertook to look at this. Unfortunately, I speed read because there were 3,000 pages. I worked all the way through one day until 3 o'clock at night in the morning, and I ended up in a rage because as I read the documents, I realized this mine was terribly dangerous. But nobody was saying that it was dangerous. Why were they not admitting it? Father Frank Nelly met me at breakfast and he said, "It's good you're angry, at least you know there's a problem. Now try to find somewhere where they admit it." So I carried on going, and by the end of 3 o'clock the next day, I'd found it. I found that their own mining engineers, consulting engineers, said the mine has a high potential for loss of life and high environmental damage if a failure of the dams or waste rock storage facility occurs. What an incredible statement. High potential for loss of life. I asked in Marbella, I said, your engineers have said this, so how many people will die if the dam fails? And where will they be? The reply from the PR director of Extrata was, that is a very unethical question. I said, it's not unethical, I want you to give me an answer. How many will die and where? And at that point, about 3,000 people got up. Father Archie's here, was it 3,000 or so? 3,000 people or more got up and cheered. So they got the message, we want an answer. We still haven't got one. They have not replied. We know where it is. It's in the Mau River, leading down to Davao del Sur. And I'm going to show you a short film after this by Bernie Lopez, who I'm pleased to work with, who is actually here in the audience. We agree with that statement. However, we totally agree with the mining company's point that they think they can guarantee to design facilities to avoid a disaster. They can't, because they're going to leave after 25 years and leave this very dangerous mine there, and it will kill people if it's accepted. You can see here where the mine is. It's right up in the top of the mountain. It's a water catchment area for 4 different provinces: South Cotabato, Sultan del Sur, Davao del Sur, and Surigao. They tried to convince me that it's not the water catchment area for South Cotabato, which leads down to Lake Bulawan. That's rubbish as well. So we made this map. I'm the mapper in the team. Dr. Goodland is he's the better writer of us, and I'm the better mapper. So I made this map with Papid. This is Davao del South Cotabato, and this is Corondal Valley, one of the most important agricultural valleys in the Philippines. The yellow is all agricultural land. The darker colours are actually plantations. So it's very important. Now you can see where the water comes from here, from this map here, or any of these maps. So we looked at their report, and their report tries to cover up the fact that the water is coming from the mine and going down into the Corondal Valley, and this is the way it goes. Those little arrows are the flow of the water. And that is under all of that valley has got shallow aquifers, about 30 to 100 meters deep. If you get pollution in an aquifer, you can never, ever clean it up. There's no way you can get at it. It's underneath the ground. Now they try to say, oh no, the water comes from Mount Matutan. That's rubbish. It comes, you can see where it comes. It comes down here. It also, some of it comes from Mount Matutan, but a vast majority comes from the mountains up here. Anyway, looking at that, so any mine pollution from here will damage all 4 provinces. And this is where the miners, and it's not just Extrata. The worst thing is there are other mining companies that have been given licenses there as well. Nobody's looking at the cumulative impact. The cumulative impact will be horrendous. These are the indigenous people's lands here. They have given FDIC because, as Gina Lopez says, they don't know any better. Somebody's offering them schools and clinics and so on. This is the protected area. That's Mount Matutan. And just have a look at how close Mount Matutan is to the mine site. It's 10 to 12 kilometers. So, in summary, the mine will damage the forest and the water catchment areas. They're going to destroy 40% of the high-altitude tropical rainforest. There's 2,200 hectares there. They're going to destroy 880 hectares of the tropical rainforest. In total, they're going to destroy 3,900 forests of different sorts. The mine, where they're actually going to put the mine itself, which will be 800 meters deep, covering 500 hectares. From that hole in the ground, they're going to deposit 2.7 billion tons. 2.7, this is not million, this is billion tons of toxic mine rock, waste and tailings. And they're going to leave the void 800 meters deep with thousands of gallons of toxic water in the water catchments of 6 rivers and the source of most of them. The Mal River will be the worst affected. The headwaters are actually going to destroy the headwaters. The rainforest was part of the headwaters. They're going to destroy that. And worst of all, the tailings dam is just above the National Irrigation Authority's irrigation dam, which controls the water going down to the fields. They have not discussed it with the National Irrigation Authority. The National Irrigation Authority wrote to them telling them that it was going to cause damage to their schemes, but nobody seems to be interested. Now, Dr. Goodland pointed out that the toxic mine waste is associated with high levels of cancer to communities nearby. And they said to me that this was totally inaccurate and we were scaremongering. Dr. Goodland told them to read the website. You can't be bothered to reply. It's a bit stupid to reply like that. Just read the website and you'll see the figures of what's actually happening in America. The next thing is that when you, as I mentioned already, when you mine down in an area of high seismic activity, because the fault lines run actually through the mine site, you have the possibility of induced seismic activity on top of the ordinary seismic activity that's taking place there. So the mine will also damage human rights, particularly those of the indigenous people, but many other stakeholders. It'll damage current plans for agriculture and ecotourism development. And the provincial government of South Cotabato has passed a moratorium forbidding all open cast mines. There are government laws to protect forests, but nobody cares. The mining companies don't care about those, they just ask for an exemption. The Climate Change Commission, which the President is chair of, has actually stated that they do not want any more forests destroyed in South Cotabato because they expect the rainfall to decrease by 20% in 20 years. So, just coming back again, I mentioned before this business of strategic environmental assessment. They forgot to mention that there was a DENR report on the water quality. I don't bother with their report on water quality because I've seen the DENR report, which is an independent report. And that's what I was telling you about. That's what it looks like, and you can't see all the arrows because they're black. But basically, they're pointing exactly the same way as our red arrows did before, coming down from the site of Mount Matutan and going down to the lake. The Lake Bulawan is home to 40,000 Muslims. Now, if they pollute that lake and the Muslims lose their livelihood, God help them. These are the fault lines, and these are the ones that they admit that exist. But there's another report, and these are the fault lines. And these ones show that the fault lines go right through the middle of the Tampakan district, And there's yet another report. And this one here shows all the fault lines, because if you look at, so you can see the star here, right in the middle of that. And you can see all the little fault lines that are crossing each other in that area. That is a nightmare. Nobody ever in their right mind, in my opinion, and that of Dr. Goodland, would want to dream of doing that in an area with that level of risk. These are the forests that are going to be destroyed. This is their site, 10,000 hectares. If you look at, I don't know if you can see them clearly from here, but I'll show you. These are the tributaries of the Mao River. All of those will be destroyed because they're going to put the tailings dams in that position. If you go to the left there, you can see where the river is going down to Marbel. So this is what they're going to do. They're going to build the open pit here, 800 meters deep, covering 500 hectares. They're going to pile the waste rock up 300 meters high. Can you imagine 300 meters high? Pretty high. And that's going to have 1.3 billion tons of waste rock in it. They're going to build a freshwater dam here and a tailings dam here. The freshwater dam is 0.8 of a kilometer long and it's 150 meters high. The tailings dam is 2.1 kilometers long and it's 280 meters high. And behind it will be all these tailings after they've crushed the ore to try to get the copper out, they're left with what are called tailings. And they will throw those into that lake and try to cover it with water, because the tailings have got the potential for acid drainage. They're also high in arsenic. But that means there's a huge quantity of tailings and water in that dam. If that dam breaches, as many dams have done in the world, and if you want to see the record, look up UNEP reports on tailings dams failures, and you will find that there are hundreds of them. In fact, in the case of Papua New Guinea and West Papua, they've given up making tailings dams. They just throw the waste in the rivers, and it causes terrible problems. But look at the National Irrigation Dam. It's just below the tailings dam. So as soon as they start clearing it, that dam's going to be silted up. And then when they damage the river, how much water is going to go to it? And when that happens, what's going to happen to the 30,000 hectares of irrigated rice in Davao del Sur? Now they justify the location of the waste rock storage facilities because it's close to the open pit mine. And that's basically to save money. Everything's to save money. They don't want to move it vast area. These are their slides. And it reduces the overall environment. I've never seen any document that reduces the overall environmental footprint. It's all a disaster. This is another river, and you can see what will happen there. This is what it will look like when it's finished. Again, this shows the tailings dams more clearly. If that dam collapses, that's where the people will die. How many? I don't know. They should have a model, and a responsible mining company would actually make a model and see what would be the effect, because they know what the volume of water and tailings will be when it comes down the mountain. But that's at the top of the mountain. So if there's, for example, if there's another typhoon like the last one in Mindanao, probably that freshwater dam will break. Then that will go down and it'll hit the other dam and break. And then the whole lot will go down the Mao River. Even if it doesn't break, in order to save themselves, they'll have to release the water. What's in the water? The water's toxic. The water's got arsenic. The water's got, it's just totally ridiculous. This just shows you the little equation of how you get to acid rock drainage. Potential for acid rock drainage and water plus oxygen equals acid rock drainage. Now we have been promoting all along this concept of the strategic environmental assessment, and we discussed it with, I discussed it with the Secretary of Agriculture, the Secretary of DMR, and yesterday with the Director of Mines and Geosciences. They are interested, so maybe we will come back and help them to look at this in more detail. That would stop a lot of these problems from happening. And this is, I'm not going to go into all of this now, but you can see it in your slides. This is how it all works and how it fits in with the other environmental studies that you do. It's at a very high level. It's not done by companies. It's done under the supervision directly of the government, and it's a very thorough environmental assessment. It looks at all the environmental resources on the island at this point in time. It looks at all the threats to them. I mean, for example, a river may be polluted by other sources. Can you afford to have mine waste going into it? And if so, can you manage one mine company's waste? But you certainly can't manage more than one. This is the way we try to teach people to do the social and environmental studies properly. So just to come back to the Chamber of Mines boast how responsible they are. We would say, I think I mentioned Dr. Goodland was the senior environmental advisor to the World Bank. So our friends who are pro-mining have a problem. They can rubbish me if they want, because I don't have a PhD in environmental science, but he has one. And he was the senior advisor to the World Bank. So, first of all, they failed to consult the Secretary of the Department of Agriculture, who is responsible for agriculture and fisheries production, including all irrigation systems. If you're doing a stakeholder analysis, how do you leave out somebody as important as that? Then the next thing is, the Philippine government has a plan, which the Secretary of Agriculture told me that he'd agreed with the President, to make the country self-sufficient in rice by 2013. How is he going to do that if the water catchments are destroyed? And then he's going to have to feed a population of 130 million by 2030. How is he going to do that when at present the country can't feed 95 million? They failed to accept that open cast mining, especially under current climatic conditions, is among the worst polluting type of mine. They failed to ask the government to allow them to break environmental laws. Oh, sorry, it's not responsible to ask the government to allow them to break environmental laws. The laws were created to protect the environment. Why should the miners be allowed to break them? They failed to respect the Climate Change Commission view that no further forests should be destroyed in South Cotabato, etc., as I've already explained to you. They object to the President's proposal for total economic valuation to be carried out, as it is in other countries such as Canada. They ask the government and people of South Cotabato, Sultan Kudarat, Davao del Sur and Sarangani to accept the risk of the mine in perpetuity, in other words, forever. They failed to consult all the stakeholders who use the water resources, including all those who live along the 6 rivers and Lake Bulawan. That is one of my most serious complaints, because they've given a lot of money to the 7 barangays on the top of the mountain, but they have not consulted all the people who live down the rivers, all the people who live on Lake Bulawan, and they have rights the same as anybody else's rights. Now they say that small-scale miners are the biggest problems. This is the Chamber of Mines. No, the biggest problems are caused by large miners who knock down sacred mountains, damage water catchments, damage agriculture, and leave toxic materials and toxic water behind forever. The Philippines gains virtually nothing financially and is left with clean-up costs forever. They had an economist who came here, whose name was David Pearce, who presented his economic model of Tampakan as the savior of the savior of the Philippines economy. Well, unfortunately for him, Dr. Goodland and I know another David Pearce, who was Professor of Economics at London School of Economics, and his name was Professor David Pearce. And he's now dead, but he would be turning in his grave at the presentation that David Pearce did, because he placed the value on rainforests, he placed the value on water catchment areas, he placed the value on marine environments, etc. Just the sort of thing the President is talking about. So basically, small-scale miners rather, they need technical help and financial support. That's not being given to them at the moment. It's no good blaming them and you're not doing anything to help them. In other countries, they are given help and they can produce minerals without all the damage that large boys are doing. And all miners must be forced to obey all laws.